All right. Welcome everyone to a remote first session for BSAD 490. Um, Unfortunate that we can't meet today for our first session of class, but that's okay. We will hopefully see each other on Thursday here. My name is Andrew Johnston. I am originally from Canada, from a city called Calgary, near quite close to the Rocky Mountains, basically in the Rocky Mountains. I am a new prof at Nichols. This is my second semester. I am really excited to be here. It's been really fun moving to Thibodaux. My family loves it here. I love it here. And hopefully, you guys will enjoy this course. As you know, this is a capstone course. And as such, it really puts everything together. The idea behind a capstone course is that, sort of like the word picture implies, it caps off the foundation of knowledge that you've built over your time here for your business qualification, which means it draws on those areas of knowledge as well. We are going to be using skills and concepts that you have learned and exercised in other classes to get a full picture analytical toolbox, you might say, and use those analytical tools and apply them to cases and even real companies. So what we'll go through today, we'll go through, as planned in the outline here, the course outline, as well as we will go through some of the concepts. We'll do about half of chapter one in the textbook, which I'll get to in a second here. Just looking, you should all be able to see my course syllabus. I'm using the same one for 4T and 5T, so just make sure you check when you're looking at it where dates might vary. I'll make that very clear if there's one date for 4T and one date for 5T. They will be basically all the same except for when you're coming into class, of course, and your exam dates. My office is top floor of Powell Hall. If Here's my office hours. You are cordially invited to come and see me or phone me anytime during office hours, of course. But also, I get that sometimes, for whatever reason, these hours might not work for you, and you are more than welcome to reach out and arrange something else. I'm here for you guys. The best part of my job is when I get to hang out, chat with my students. So please feel free to shoot me an email if you need to arrange something different. I'll give out my my cell number here in class. You guys can jot that down too. Sometimes I know it's easier when the pressure's on or whatever. You can just send a text. Doesn't mean I can always answer, but I certainly try to. And a lot of the time, I am able to answer quite quickly if you send me a text message. That's probably my easiest mode of communication for really quick questions and discussions. But like I said, happy to do it however you guys want. Um, I'll skip some of the boilerplate stuff here. And this is worth noting. The textbook, I'd initially made my request to the bookstore for you to have the Mind Tap course. I don't think that's actually going to be necessary. I've decided not to use the Mind Tap stuff and just use the textbook and what's in the book itself. So I've sent that to the bookstore. There's a digital edition that you can purchase or rent, however you see fit. Feel free if you can find it online cheaper if you need a hard copy version, whatever you like, but you will want to have a copy of the textbook. I will be using this when I give a textbook out. I use it a lot. I don't expect you guys to spend a bunch of money on a textbook and then not really use it. So we'll be drawing on this textbook fairly heavily. So you definitely do want to get a copy. Other resources that you'll need to use and that are worth mentioning right off the bat here. I will expect you to find articles in the business press. And in the past, I've given a variety of options, but the fact of the matter is there's really no substitute for the Wall Street Journal. So I will expect you guys to be able to access. I'll bring articles to class, but I'll really expect you in your work groups. We'll talk about work groups in a few minutes here. I'll expect you to be able to do research using the Wall Street Journal. I think it's $1 a week for your first year or something like that. So however you want to do it, pitch in 25 cents each per week or whatever, but you're going to need to have access to the Wall Street Journal and it's going to cost you. There is a paywall, but it's pretty, skip. I don't know, skip the candy bar each week and get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. Other materials that you will need for this course, you will need to use S&P Capital IQ. That's a database that you have access to that we pay a good deal of money for. In fact, mostly at the behest of the business school. You have access to that via the library website. So your homework, one of the things I will ask you to do for next class is to set yourself up on S&P Capital IQ if you haven't done so already. If you have done it already, just make sure it still works because I'm going to be using that. You're going to be using it for research. I'm going to probably give out some quizzes to check that you know how to use S&P Capital IQ, but it's also S&P Capital IQ is going to be the source for a lot of the material that we bring into class and apply class concepts to. So 3 things so far, the textbook, subscription to the Wall Street Journal, and set up S&P Capital IQ. So you can see here a list of the topics that we're going to be covering. I will try and stick to this fairly closely, but I do reserve the right to move stuff around. I won't do so without letting you know, and I won't do so to your disadvantage, you might put it. So if a deadline needs to be moved, that will be moved backwards, further away rather than earlier, so that if something like that does need to happen, you're not it's not making your life more difficult, theoretically. Topics we'll cover in this course. We are going to discuss a little bit today about what strategic management actually is. What is we'll do a broad overview of some of the concepts and get started briefly on one of the first concepts, one of the, which you might call the models, conceptual models or approaches to strategic management. Next week, we're going to take a brief diversion from the textbook chapters and just dive into the use of financial ratios. You have almost certainly come across financial ratios in accounting and finance. You may well have forgotten them. That is okay. That is, in fact, why we will be doing this. And the reason we're going to look at financial ratios is because they are a great way to measure performance. The third part of our model for this course, it's going to follow something called the ASP model, where we analyze, we implement or design and implement strategy. That's the S. And then P is we perform. And one of the things you need to know is, well, how do we measure performance? Peter Drucker is attributed, a quote attributed to Peter Drucker is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Now, that might not even be, it might be one of those quotes that he never actually said, but it's often associated with Peter Drucker, a kind of a management guru. We'll take a brief, do a brief refresher here on financial ratios, maybe a little bit of Excel. We will then start to look at how we analyze the external environment. Next week, we'll be looking at how we analyze the internal environment. We will then talk about business level strategy, which you might call the micro level of strategy, corporate strategy being the macro level. Business level strategy is how do we want to compete? Corporate level is where do we want to compete? There'll be a midterm exam there in the week of February 25th and 27th. We will start to talk about competition. The whole thing that really defines strategy is it's from planning in particular, right? And we can dive into this a bit maybe more in class, but strategy and planning are not the same thing. Um, all strategy involves planning, but not all planning is necessarily strategic, you might say. It might just be a capital allocation plan. It might be a plan for the Christmas party. But strategy, one of the things that separates strategy from planning is it is with reference to competition. We will talk a little bit after corporate strategy. We'll talk about mergers and acquisitions and restructuring, which is maybe something you're interested in. Uh, I feel like when I was doing my business qualification, mergers and acquisitions or M&As seemed really interesting and exciting, and that's what business degrees will teach us about, right? So we'll dive into that a bit, and then you can throw around some of your M&A knowledge and watch Bloomberg News and speak intelligently about mergers and acquisitions. We'll look at international strategy, an area that I do a lot of research in, actually. We'll look at cooperative strategies, what happens and how do you manage cooperative relationships with other firms. We'll look at how to structure a company. There are different options for companies, and oftentimes one of the great challenges as a company grows is that the structure needs to change to fit the strategy. And then we'll look at controls as well. How do we implement our strategy and make sure it's working? A big part of this of this course and its assessment is going to be group presentations, which will be that last week. I've got the different evaluation types listed here in the syllabus. Final exam dates right here. Put those down in your calendars, please. Oops, I need to erase this. It's not to be confirmed. It is, we know what it is. So I'll just get rid of that and fix it on, well, I can fix it right now, actually, and upload this to Canvas. Course evaluation dates. Feedback is a gift. I will give you feedback. It's really useful for me to get feedback. It is information. Information is valuable. We're going to talk about information as a resource and knowledge as a resource. The information I get from you guys on what you like and don't like about the course, combined with other information I get from assessing you guys in class, helps me to make this a better course. You guys are my customers. You guys are here to get a qualification that will be valuable. And it's my passion to teach you things that you will find valuable and teach them in a way that you find readies you for assessment and then later on for the working world and the great careers you're going to go on to get with this qualification from the Aldanos College of Business. There will be, so all that to say, course evaluations are really important. I am probably going to, they're so important, and the rate of filling them out is so poor that I will probably just sit you guys all down and lock you in the classroom at some point and ask you to please fill them out. I won't really lock you in the classroom, but I will give you guys course time physically in class and ask you to do it. There are going to be quizzes throughout the weeks of the course. I don't know how many yet. They basically, I've assigned 15% of your grade to quizzes, and it allows me to do what you might call cumulative assessment, make sure that, or not a cumulative assessment, a sort of spot assessments to make sure that you guys are understanding things and that I'm teaching them well. Also a bit of incentive to be learning the concepts rather than just all of a sudden you arrive at the exam and you have to cram for everything. Just build that into the class. So I reserve the right to give pop quizzes as well. So there will be some pop quizzes. So a little bit of skin in the game for you guys to make sure you're in class and on time. I won't do makeup quizzes unless there's a really good reason. And those reasons are generally involve a doctor's note. So yeah, so be there in class, or you might miss a pop quiz, and there won't be any makeups. There'll be 2 exams covering material from the class. We'll talk about that in more detail as we get closer. And then the big, one of the most weightiest items here, I'll just scroll down to this so you guys can see. In fact, the largest item in your grade book is going to be this team presentation. You guys will be giving a 25-minute presentation in groups. I'll be assigning groups By Thursday, hopefully at the latest. I just need to wait to get some information on who's in the class and make sure that those groups are assigned intelligently. But I'll be assigning groups, so watch out for that in Canvas. I'll make sure to let you guys all know. And you'll be doing a few, basically, the homework assignments are sections. The group homework assignments will be sections of that final project. So kind of like the quizzes, it allows us to build things out over time, build out that final presentation over time, and make sure everything's on track. All right. The ETS exam. Team homework assignments as well. You will do peer evaluations, and those peer evaluations will contribute to your goal, to your grade on the team homework and assignments and the presentation. I absolutely do every semester use those. If there's a group member that is flagged up by all the other group members as not performing, or basically I give you guys all sheets and say, give everyone a grade based on their contribution to this. And if it's less than 100%, then I basically use that as a scaling factor for whatever your group marks were. If I thought the group presentation overall was a B plus, but all your teammates said you only did 75% effort, I'll apply a 75% scaling factor to that B plus grade. Conversely, I give you guys the opportunity, if you say that someone did more than 100% effort, then I scale the grade up, which I love doing as well. Um, yeah, I used to do some consulting for Goldman Sachs when I lived in the UK, in London, England. And one of the most useful pieces of motivational speak that I ever heard, it was actually quite funny. I used to train apprentices at Goldman Sachs, kind of younger guys and gals. And one day, two of the guys got into a fist fight in the boardroom, and I actually wasn't sure what was going to happen. And the way they addressed it was they told him it was a missed opportunity. And one of the phrases that came up was perception is reality. If people perceive you in a certain way, it doesn't matter whether it's your fault. It doesn't matter in a sense whether there's mitigating circumstances. It doesn't matter if you think that perception is true. The way you are the only one who can control, in a sense, or impact the way you are perceived by others, at least in under normal circumstances, in a professional working environment. So that peer evaluation is part of this idea that perceptions matter, and perception is reality. The way you're perceived by your peers that you're working with will contribute to your success or failure. And it's an opportunity to demonstrate leadership. And falling short of your peers' expectations is a missed opportunity to demonstrate that leadership. You guys will also be taking something called the ETS exam. I can't even remember right now what that stands for, but it is essentially another very valuable piece of information. It's mandatory, it's not optional, but it isn't graded. Um, and essentially, it tells us at the business school how our delivery is going. That's why we give it at the very end of your time with us. So, and it assesses you on all the different areas of knowledge that you should have leaving an AACSB qualified business school. Um, it's useful for you because it tells you it's kind of a way to see how you've done, how's your knowledge, how do you stack up basically against graduates from this business school and from others. And it's useful for us because if there's gaps in your knowledge, we can identify those and tweak the course. You have benefited in this class and in your education here from the efforts of previous students who have taken that ETS exam. That's one of the ways we knew that we needed to do a bit of review on financial ratios in this course, for example. So here is the breakdown. This is scheduled. Have a look in the schedule. I think it's right before spring break. Um, when is the ETS exam? I might have to add that in here if it's not here already. So I'll fix that. Cool. So yeah, stay tuned. I might need to update this with the date for the ETS exam if it's not in there. Um, Attendance and class participation is also assessed in this class and worth 10%. Basically, you need to show up. I notice when you don't show up. I'm not going to be doing a roll call, but you and I will both know if you've missed a bunch of classes, you'll get a zero um, in your participation. I do it at halfway through the semester and at the end of the semester. That sort of allows um, you to get some information halfway through and course correct if that's necessary. So if you missed a bunch of classes and you get a zero for that semester for participation, you might say, "Oh my goodness, I need to make sure I'm getting into class." I'll also put a bit of feedback if you're generally contributing um, in class, that mark goes up. If you're not, if one of the interesting findings I was watching a video about on YouTube is the fact that apparently humans are very good at telling where someone's eyes are. Um, Incredibly good. They've done tests on this, and I can tell you that as your professor, it's very easy for me to tell if you're just on your laptop checking the football scores or whatever. So I can tell when you're distracted. Um, I don't want to go the route of saying nobody can have any technology in class. But if you seem distracted, if I and I'll test it, I'll sort of ask you for an opinion or ask you a question or ask for your feedback on something in class if I think you're being distracted, and usually it's a case of, yeah, we both know that you weren't really paying attention. So that's how that participation grade comes about. Good. Nothing much else to say here. There's no extra points. There's no makeup work. You need to get your grade. You need to earn your grade. Um, so just know that right at the outset. There aren't any extra credit assignments or anything like that. And people fail. People have failed this course. Now, if you come and do what's expected, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. But people do fail. And I hate doing it because uh, this is usually the only grade standing between you and your graduation. So don't put either of us in that situation. Anything else on that? Oh, that kind of touches on this academic dishonesty, cheating, etc. policy. Don't plagiarize. Don't use AI to do your homework for you. We can talk a bit more in class about what is a great way what are really good ways to use AI and what are not great ways to use AI. I use AI all the time in my work, but there's things I use it for and things I don't use it for. I think it's a great tool. I have I have taken, not at this institution, thankfully, but at my previous institution, I've caught students plagiarizing, and that's gone all the way to the dean of the business school, and they've had to do kind of I think a fairly embarrassing remedial course. So just again, don't put either of us in that situation. Um, I won't let it slide. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to the others in your class who are working for a quality qualification. Good. Some other stuff here on appeals, who my boss is, who the dean of the business school is. Turn it in. We will use this to check for plagiarism. If I think it's one of those things when you've been doing this long enough, you can kind of sniff when something's off. Um, so yeah, that's enough on academic um, policy stuff. Things have been great here so far, and I don't expect any problems there. Um, cool. All right. So much for the syllabus. If you have any questions, by all means, contact me via email or just feel free to ask me in class. I'll have an opportunity for that on Thursday. I also keep office hours immediately after class on both Tuesdays and Thursdays. Bit more convenient if you're in the 5T, I guess, because then you can just come right after class. If you're in the 4T, you have to wait for me to finish teaching the 5T and then you can come grab me. So let's start diving in to our subject matter here. I am going to move my screen sharing to another screen here. Let's see if we can do this. This is kind of a bit of a throwback for me back to the good old or probably bad old days of the COVID pandemic when everything was online and not the most enjoyable way to teach or attend class, at least in my estimation. But we'll make do. Um, good. So let me see if I can make this look a bit more like a slideshow. There we go. Now, I actually have no idea which view you have of this right now. Let's see here. Cool. It's the view I was hoping you'd have. Good. All right. So, um, right off the bat here, like I said, we'll be using the textbook. I'll be going through using the slides from the textbook, at least for this semester. It's a textbook that I just adopted. I've been using the same one for about 5 or 6 years, and it's getting a bit dated. Some of the examples just aren't that great anymore. Um, so this one I really like, and probably if there's stuff, I apologize in advance if there's things that maybe aren't as good as I would have hoped. Sometimes I'm sort of building the plane as I fly it here, so I might have to make some adjustments as we go along, but hopefully we should be able to stick fairly close. I think the selection of topics in this textbook is really good. I did a fair bit of research to find one I liked. Um, won't do the icebreaker. Topics we're going to discuss today. Going to do some definitions: strategic competitiveness, strategy, competitive advantage, above average returns, and the strategic management process. What do these things mean? These are sort of the bread and butter terms that we're going to be using throughout the course, throughout this whole semester. We're going to talk about the competitive landscape and some of the features of the competitive landscape that you will hear discussed a lot, both in academic literature or in sort of your Harvard Business Review type business literature, as well as just the press and the newspapers. Things like globalization, the impact of technological changes. AI is going to be something I'm going to try to introduce and discuss a fair bit in class because it's moving so quickly and it's going to shape our world so dramatically. I really think I've heard people say it's going to be like the Gutenberg press, right? That revolution that happened after the printing press was invented and everyone started to be able to read and distribute books. It's going to be 1,000 times more impactful than that, I think, this AI revolution. We're going to talk about a model called the industrial organization model. That's the first of 3 models we're going to discuss for forming strategy. We're going to talk about the resource-based model, which is, you can talk about IO, industrial organization, being the external analysis. We're going to talk about the resource-based model, or the resource-based view, it's sometimes called, as an internal analysis. We're going to talk about the stakeholder model, which looks at the relationship that a firm has with people who provide those resources. That includes, of course, shareholders, employees, but also suppliers and customer relationships. The government is a pretty important stakeholder. All those different people in your environment that can either help you or hinder you as you seek to earn these above average returns that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes here. What are these above average returns? We're going to talk about vision, mission, and value statements. We'll probably talk about that more on Thursday rather than today, and why they're important. And strategic leaders. What is a strategic leader? How does strategy get implemented finally in that last section of this of these lectures that we'll have today and Thursday? All right. So strategic competitiveness is this idea that it is something that's achieved by implementing the strategy. The whole point of this course is how can we achieve strategic competitiveness? And you might say, well, how's that different from just competitiveness? Of course, there are different what you might say, dimensions of competitiveness, of competition. One of them would be efficiency, for example. Are we competitive in terms of our cost efficiency? That's a great question. It's not really strategic. That has more to do with things like operations management would be somewhere that you're talking about your competitiveness in efficiency. how effective is our marketing, right? There's different ways or dimensions in which you can be competitive. When we talk about strategic competitiveness, we're talking about value that's created by formulating and implementing our strategy. So what is a strategy then? Uh, the definition we have here, it's an integrated and coordinated set of commitments and actions designed to exploit core competencies and gain a competitive advantage. Um, to simplify that a bit, I would say that it is the decisions or the plan that's made to allocate the resources of a company or a firm in order to meet the opportunities and threats in the firm's environment. And not just the resources, but the capabilities as well. We'll dive into this more in the coming classes. Resources are what you have at your disposal. Capabilities are what you can do with those resources. And then your environment presents you with opportunities and threats. Maybe you are a great violin player. That's your capability. You have a beautiful, expensive violin is a resource that sounds really good, and there's an opportunity to play with an orchestra that provides you with an opportunity to create value, and someone will pay you to do it, would be sort of how those concepts link up. And your strategy is about how you apply those resources and capabilities to that opportunity or to mitigate a threat. All of this with reference to what's going on with your competitors, crucially. Your strategy says what you're going to do, but it also says what you're not going to do. That can be really important. A lot of firms run into trouble when they start doing too many things or doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing, which can destroy value. Ford, for example, recently decided they were going to stop making electronic vehicles because they were losing $30,000 per vehicle sold. They were destroying value. Customers were not willing to pay above the cost of creating that product, which destroyed value. So they made it a strategic decision, initially a bad one, that they were going to make EVs, and now they're correcting that and deciding that they will not make EVs. What is a competitive advantage? Well, a competitive advantage is basically something that allows you to create superior value is the word they've used here. We'll talk about superior value and above average returns quite a bit in this course. But essentially, it's what when we say creating superior value, we're talking about creating a willingness to pay. That's a concept we'll dive into on Thursday. I like to kind of draw this out on the board, how value is created and what we mean when we're saying that we create value. But the idea here is to create superior value for your customers. The value that you create is only there if someone's willing to pay for it. If you think you've created something really valuable and nobody wants to pay for it, you haven't created value, at least not with respect to the way we use that term in this course. Generally speaking, these competitive advantages are eroded. Sometimes quickly, sometimes over the long term. But basically, if you get good at something and you're creating value and making buckets of money, someone else is going to see what you're doing and say, hey, I think I could do that too, or I want to learn how to do that so I can make buckets of money. So what are above average returns? Above average returns in the way that we're going to talk about them basically means above the cost of capital. We don't mean just what's average profitability. That's not quite the right term. If because it all depends on your cost of capital. What's your cost of capital? You may remember this from your finance course, or ways to calculate this, like the capital asset pricing model, or from your borrowing, how much you have to give on how much you have to pay investors on your bond yields. But basically, it's not enough just to be profitable. If you are a risky business, investors might expect a 10% return. Now, maybe you were profitable 7%. You are below the expectations that your investors have based on the nature of your industry. One really interesting thing that happened last semester that I brought to class was NVIDIA was kind of the darling stock last year. They were growing at a crazy rate, like their profits were increasing like 200%, 300% per quarter, and they gave their quarterly earnings report, and they'd increased returns by 200%, and their stock went down. That was because they were not earning, the investors' expectations were higher than that. So they were actually punished, even though they'd made a huge profit. The investors expected more from them. Their cost of capital was higher than what they'd given. We can talk about this a bit more in class, but that's what we mean when we say above average returns. And what that means is you have what you're expected by your investors to pay them out, either by dividends or by capital gains in the stock or by paying out bonds. But above that is what the firm gets to keep and plow back into its operations, or it might increase. I suppose as a manager, it increases your prestige, and that's what these firms are looking to do. If you don't have, so that's what a competitive advantage does for it. It helps us earn above average return. If we don't have a competitive advantage, then we're going to be average or perhaps even below average. If we're below average, we get in trouble as the senior, and we really take the view of a senior leader here. We're kind of, you can almost kind of mostly picture yourself in the seat of the CEO or someone advising the CEO for most of the concepts in this course. And if you earn below average returns or below your cost of capital, which is what you need, your investors expect of you for an investment of that risk for your company, they will punish you. They might fire you. There's a number of stories recently in the press where firms have been getting rid of CEOs that performed below the risk adjusted rate of return. The strategic management process is really just the cycle starting with analysis. We look around, we do an in-depth analysis, and that's going to be the bulk of this course really is learning how to analyze the external environment, the internal environment, then formulate a strategy, and then perform and implement that strategy and assess that performance. That whole cycle is the strategic management process. Uh, I find this to be a fairly helpful little display here. It shows us kind of how it all ties together, both conceptually, but also for the within this textbook and thus within this course. We will not, unfortunately, probably get into strategic leadership and entrepreneurship. It's just a lot to cover, and strategy implementation starts to. It's really useful, but if we got to make the cut somewhere, that's probably where we want to make it. But we might get to it, so we'll see how things go. But basically, this analysis happens and feeds into strategy formulation and then the implementation, which hopefully ends up with strategic competitiveness, which is then evaluated and fed back, wash, rinse, repeat. All right, and you know what? Let's see here. We'll go through these and then we will stop just before we get to the issue of returns, I think. Good. All right. So the competitive landscape, we'll go through this fairly quickly for now. Essentially, the competitive landscape in which strategy is formed in 2025, there are some dynamics that are worth knowing about and which are going to come up fairly regularly in our discussions in class. I'm not trying to prepare you for the corporate world of the 1950s. Things change, the global environment changes, and these are trends that are fairly significant on the planning or strategic process horizon right now. One of them is globalization, and one of them is digitalization. Those are pretty key dimensions in the strategy environment right now. And in order to adapt, it's said that things are changing quickly. Every generation says things are changing really quickly in their generation. So is it changing quickly relative to other generations? As a historian, I would say it's all relative, maybe, maybe not. So that's okay. It means that really managers always need to have, it says they must adapt a new mindset. I would say good managers always have this mindset historically for the last 300 years at least, that prioritizes flexibility, And what we mean by that is the ability to adapt to changes in your environment, be able to do that quickly, speed, innovation, be able to find innovation. What we mean by that, we'll dive into it in later weeks. But innovation for our purposes is the ability to create value, to come up with new ideas that create value. An invention in this class isn't the same thing as an innovation. An invention might be great, but if nobody wants to pay for it, we don't care about it. It becomes an innovation when somebody wants to pay for it. Integrating that and implementing it in your firm, all within constantly changing conditions in the environment. We'll talk about this idea of hyper competition. Globalization and digitization has really increased and made things much more competitive. One of the ways I like to think to talk about this is if you're the best. So my daughter won her rec softball team won the Thibodeau rec softball championship for her age in the fall, which is great. However, would they necessarily, if they were to broaden that pool of competitors to maybe all of Lafourche, would they still be the top team? Less likely. If they even broadened it to play with travel ball teams, they almost certainly wouldn't be the best team. Now, what if we talk about opening it up to all Louisiana or all of the USA? Basically, if you're in the number one position out of two, that's interesting, but would you still be number one out of 10, number one out of 100, right? The larger that pool of competitors becomes, the more likely that the top 1% or top 20% or whatever of that pool is going to be better than it was when it was a smaller sized pool, right? That whole idea of would you rather be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? I think I'm getting that right. So when you open up to competition globally, there's more competitors coming from more places. The chances that there is going to be someone better than you are increase. And then digitization is an important part of that because it essentially allows for that global competition to happen. Digitization, there wouldn't be any Amazon. Companies in China and India wouldn't be competing with Amazon if it wasn't for this digitization of the workplace that's happening. Some of the dimensions or some of the aspects of that hyper competition come with the price quality positioning. Amazon, to use an example I'll use a lot in this course, is able to offer a very good price to quality ratio. I can get things here in Thibodaux from Amazon much more cheaply than I can from the local ma and pa hardware store, whatever you like. And I think we have a particularly good example here. We're slightly more rural here in Thibodaux. There are things you can't get without driving maybe an hour and a half away, if at all, that you can get from Amazon. Now you might have to wait a little while to get it, but this is all part of this price quality positioning that's enabled by global competition and digitization. We can get products from China relatively quickly that might be better than what we would otherwise have access to here, which is great for us as consumers, but pretty difficult means you're competing more fiercely if you're just a local producer. What is a global economy? It's simply one where goods, services, people, skills, ideas are able to move freely across geographic borders. That's a relative term. It's almost never been completely freely moving, but it can be if there's no tariffs, it can be fairly close. Makes things more competitive for the reasons I've outlined here. It makes things more complicated. And so understanding the global economy is important for strategy formulation. It's going to be important to you guys as you prepare for your presentations and choose your companies, which we'll talk about probably on Thursday in person. One of the most common thing or barrier, if you want to think of like a fence or a wall that can be erected that makes an economy less global is tariffs. There's a lot of talk about Trump imposing tariffs on goods from China right now or wherever. And that obviously makes an economy less global. The whole point, actually, there can be multiple points. We can talk about this in class. One of the most common motivations for tariffs is to prevent competition. It's in order to, if you think about sports, we have weight classes in boxing because the guys who weigh 120 pounds don't want to compete against the guys who weigh 300 pounds. But there's also there's also skill classes as well. So um, there is going to be a class, maybe a regional division, maybe an A, B, C division, right? And then there's a top division. So if we can keep people out of our division, there's a better chance that we'll be the top in our whatever protected area we're in. And that's really generally what tariffs try to do. Although there are also political motivations, geopolitical motivations as well, which I think is probably part of the current so-called trade wars that might be happening here soon. Um, yeah, when you're considering an economy to go into, to enter, whether or not it's growing matters. If you're going into an economy that's shrinking, the chances, basically the pie shrinking, and the likelihood that you're going to be able to get a piece of that pie as it's getting smaller is less than if the pie is growing. You want to go somewhere where the pie is growing. Um, Global supply chain is part of this idea of globalization. Um, if you think about a company like Apple, they get different parts of the iPhone from different companies all over the world. That's their supply chain. Where do we get our batteries from? Where do we get our glass? We get our glass from Corning, perhaps, right? The Gorilla Glass company. The chip maybe comes from somewhere, although now Apple's increasingly backwards integrating into its supply chain. But a global supply chain basically means we get our inputs to whatever our final product is from all over the world. And a lot of companies right now, unless they're giving haircuts, or even if they are giving haircuts, they probably have a global supply chain, right? They probably are getting their clippers from China or wherever. It's a feature of the modern strategy landscape that's also worth knowing about, this global supply chain. Um, Yeah, it's good. Globalization has tended to be good for customers, I would say. We all like having cheap stuff, better quality stuff. The things we are able to buy now, the fact that we can have a computer in our pocket for $1,000, that was only seen on science fiction like Star Trek when I was growing up. Right, a tablet was basically, nobody even would have dreamed that we'd have anything like that. And the fact that basically everyone in a developed country can afford something like that if they really want one is incredible. And that's a result of global technology, globalization, and advances in knowledge. But there's also the opposite. It creates problems for workers. It creates problems for domestic industries. It's also difficult. It presents challenges when a company tries to expand. So globalization is a bit of a double-edged sword. And there's a lot of talk right now. There's a lot of discontent happening with globalization. That's why things like tariffs, things like restrictions on migrant laborers, et cetera, that's a hot issue. It can be in conflict with other values that a society might have. Some considerations here to do with technology and changes in technology. It pretty much affects everything. I know a guy who does gutters, and he uses AI to help him. He spends a lot of time trying to optimize, for example, Google search, pay per click. Um, there's not really any industry where you can just sit back and ignore technology, right? It's everywhere. If you're not using ChatGPT in your life, you're missing out, right? I have a friend who uses it to plan her weekly um, menu, the dinner menus for the week, right? ChatGPT, here's what I have in the fridge, or here's what I like, here's some constraints. Give me a dinner, a weekly menu for my family of five, and give me the recipes, right? It's amazing. The diffusion of technology talks about how quickly technology spreads. This is really important when we talk about a competitive advantage. If it spreads quickly, the technology is probably not going to give you a competitive advantage for very long. If it's a technology that you can keep from diffusing very quickly, it might be able to give you a longer competitive advantage. Perpetual innovation is this idea. If you think about maybe computer chips, NVIDIA, Intel, basically you can't just innovate and sit on that innovation most of the time. There are exceptions, but with something like chip, those chips just have to keep getting faster. The only way to sustain a competitive advantage is to release a faster chip next year, a better iPhone next year. Otherwise, everyone catches up to you. You have a lead on your competitors, and you can only keep that if you're moving forward. Sounds exhausting, doesn't it? Disruptive technologies is another concept that we'll talk about when we talk about innovation. And that's a technology that destroys the value of existing technology. What would be a good example? Streaming, the ability to transmit audio files via the internet destroyed the physical mediums of transmitting audio. I was 16 when what was it called now? I can't even remember. The first streaming service came, or not the first. It allowed you to download MP3s, burn them to see Napster. That's what it was. When Napster came out, and it blew us away. You could take all these songs, download them for free off the internet, put them on a CD, and listen to them. And it really disrupted the industry. You had guys like Eminem and Metallica getting really upset. They were losing millions of dollars. And trying to stop that change from happening, and that wasn't the right approach. The companies that managed to, who are dominant now, are almost not any of the same companies who were dominant before that technological change from that disruptive technology. So you get guys like Spotify who figured out how to innovate and market and create value with that new technology. So that's what a disruptive technology is. We'll move through here pretty quick. Big data will come into it, the ability to capture your customers' data and use it to create more value. See what's moving, see what's not moving at the most basic level, what's selling, optimize everything, optimize storage, optimize warehousing, optimize transportation. Good. I'm going to leave it here. I think we've gone far enough. I will start talking about social responsibility next class. So I'll pick it up here where we left off, and then we can jump into our three models of strategy, industrial organization, resource-based view, and stakeholders. Yeah, hope you guys are all doing well, keeping warm. Hopefully things don't get too crazy here with the snow. Nobody's heat goes off. And yeah, I'm on the clock now. The semester started. If you need me, if you want some office hours, just let me know. If anything's missing or if you have any questions from this lecture, let me know. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all in person on Thursday, if not next week. We'll see how things go. All right. Bye.